Well, good morning, Yuba Sutter and adjacent counties. This is Nate Black, your Sutter County Auditor Controller, and we're jumping into the second hour of the Andy Show, the Andy Vasquez Show.
It's Nate and Andy Show.
Well, you're the man. Thank you. I wanted to quickly start off by announcing on November the 6th, Monday coming up, going to be at the Sutter Buttes Tea Party at Glad Tidings in their original building, and going to be speaking at 6:30 to them for an hour and a half or so. And if you are interested, please come over and join us. We're going to be talking about a lot of interesting, I hope, local issues. We'll talk a little bit about CalPERS, about the homeless issue, et cetera. And if you show up and you ask a question, there's pretty much 100% chance I will weigh into that. Anything is on the table. So do join us for that. Okay, today or this morning, wanted to talk a little bit about, I was going to summarize what happened at the supervisor meeting on Tuesday this past week. And the supervisor meeting was a unique beast in that it was a 4-hour meeting, actually over 4 hours. And it was almost entirely on the homeless recommendation from the county administrator. So it was a very interesting meeting, and about 50-50 in terms of the time. About the first 2 hours were met with were the CAO and all of the staff and folks that he wanted to speak to kind of set forth the plan, the health impacts, the polling and data they've been able to gather from the river bottoms, et cetera. So they kind of rolled out all of that stuff, and then after that 2 hours or so, the balance of the time was mostly public comment from over 20 individual citizens of the county, and then finally supervisor remarks. So where it all landed was, at this point, nowhere. We're not moving forward with any particular plan just yet. It's been delayed or kicked the can down the road for just a couple more weeks. They wanted a little more. Tabled, yes. They wanted to kind of go back and reevaluate a few things. So what happened at the very end is the third supervisor to speak was Supervisor Flores, and he put together 13 amendments to the CAO's plan. So those amendments often were, I think the first one was, for example, bring back other locations. So Whitaker Hall is a building that's over at the adjacent to the airport by the levee on 2nd Street, and that was a very contentious site, whether it's the Peach Bowl Little League next door.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
No. You just mentioned that because it's also adjacent to a whole bunch of kids stuff.
Yes, it's adjacent to the kids stuff. Peach Bowl Little League. It's adjacent to the Rod and Gun Club. The Rod and Gun Club. And and as another gentleman who got up and spoke said, that's 35 yards from where they're camping currently. I don't think that's the best place, only moving them again up and over the levee and then down and boom, here's your homeless kind of site. So it was tabled. The 13 amendments were put forth by Supervisor Flores, and the end of it was not a vote to accept those amendments or anything. It was just, hey, let's look at them again, the plan plus amendments, and we will come back at it in a couple of weeks. And I think that's about it as far as my understanding of it. So it was an interesting night, that is for sure, and it was interesting to have a plan that was kind of worked on for, as the CAO was saying, about the last year, over 100 people in the county, to have zero support from the supervisors. That was an interesting result. Now, it's not to say entirely that they didn't agree with any of it, but they did not move on it, and so we'll see how it progresses in a couple of weeks. And as this next week transpires, and we'll see what this new written plan is supposed to look like, I'll hopefully be able to speak to it again next weekend and have some interesting comments from that. So that's kind of what I was going to do on the homeless. Just give a quick summary, and then we'll kind of get back to it next weekend, perhaps.
Okay.
Unless you guys wanted to jump in with any questions or comments.
No. I think we've gored enough But one of the things that on your discussions that you've had before, we were talking about CalPERS, and what's your opinion of Marysville trying to exit CalPERS? I just we've often asked ourselves, is there any way we can get out of it? And from what you've explained, and it's been an eye-opening experience listening to all the things that you have, that we can't just
That's right.
exit stage left. And I think Marysville's opening a can of worms. But
I really appreciate the question, Andy, and I also really appreciate the city of Marysville for taking a look at this and analyzing it. I think that's a wonderful first step. And I'll say that one of the council members reached out to me asking if I could assist in this process. And anyway, what I was thinking about doing is I'm gonna show up in the near future at a Marysville City Hall meeting or a City Council meeting, excuse me, and I'm going to see what I can do to help them analyze and understand any or all of this. It's a real passion of mine to help. Yuba Sutter is really one community. Yes, we're various cities, etc., but we're really one community. It's the tale of two cities, like Minnesota, St. Paul. And so with that, if there's anything we can cross-pollinate or assist with across the river, gosh, we need to do it. We need to help out. So I'm going to go over there and see if there's something I can do to help at all. I understand. I think they're down a finance director at this time, so they're kind of short on staff. So again, just a really proud and happy that at least they started that conversation. But to answer your question, Andy, no, to get out of CalPERS, to close your plan, it's at this point there's only two ways or two results from that option. The first is you are able to somehow come up with an enormous amount of money that not a single jurisdiction in the state has, which is an impossibility, meaning there isn't enough money at any of our treasuries around the state. And I could pretty much say that as far as the CalPERS employers, not independent systems. They do not have enough money to close. And the other option is to cut the benefits of the retirees. City of Loyalton, San Gabriel, etc.
The fact that they reached out to you, that's one of the best decisions they've made in years, I feel, because, I have a saying, never go to Colonel Sanders for sushi. And that's kind of down on the ground level discussion, but, you can't make a better analogy because that's what so many people do is we go to Denver, we go to Philadelphia, we look at these beautiful things, and then we bring these ideas home, and here's what they've done is they've extended to you an invitation to actually communicate together. So what they're doing is they're asking somebody who knows this frontwards and backwards, and why reinvent the wheel?
Well, I'm still learning, and I'm still trying to improve my understanding of it all. But more and more, I'm getting really, really comfortable that I understand the issue, the defined benefit pension issue, fairly well. At least I understand the severity of it, which is the most important part. And to find, I'm going to repeat this from a prior show, but I just want to explain the reason why you can't get to a closed plan well. And this is the reason why I'm going to take a second, Andy, is because I want everyone to know out there the only way through this, truly, in my humble opinion, is through legislative change. We have got to have a change in Sacramento on this particular item, and it's as follows. When you become a closed plan, so that means that new hire employees will no longer be provided for example, a CalPERS option. So they come in, they no longer get a CalPERS pension. They instead get something, for example, like a 401k in the private sector with a county match or an employer match. That's a defined contribution plan. So what happens in a closed plan is as follows. The way it exists today and why legislative fix is required is that CalPERS says, okay, we're closing your plan. No new hires, and basically, actually, everything sort of stops with the plan. No new hires can come into it. They also say, hey, because you're closing, you're no longer going to be putting in new contributions to it. So we're gonna, because that means that the risk of default is greater, and so we are going to move the money that you've put with CalPERS and that we've invested in the market. We're going to move all of that money that's your part over into this really, really, quote, risk-free fund, because you're no longer putting money into this thing. You have to pay it all today now that you closed. And forevermore, we can't have the risk that those assets in the market are not going to obtain their yield. Okay, in other words, the big risk that everybody thinks about when they talk about CalPERS is the 2008 stuff. So I partly prepared this morning to talk about that. I wanted to say that, and I'm going to come right back to this point. In 2007, June 30, 2007, do you know that CalPERS' funded status, that is the CalPERS plan as a whole, all the employers' money that's in CalPERS, it was 101% funded. So it was super funded a mere 10 years ago. We had more money at CalPERS than we needed to ultimately pay off all of these pensions. And in 10 years' time, we've climbed downwards to 68%. So that's a 33% drop. Here's the question to everybody out there. What happens if 2008 comes again now? So we've had 10 years of, quote, growth, mostly growth. We've had a little mini in there, kind of fall or recession, but we've built and built and built, yet we're still 68% funded. So what happens if another 2008 comes in the next couple of years? If we get to, say, 50% funded, I'm telling you right now, everybody across this state is going to lose it. The Sacramento is going to lose it, and it's going to be a massive problem, because once you get below, say, 50%, basically it's a non-sustainable plan.
Isn't the time to act now?
Always.
But let me ask you, why isn't the board being held accountable for their actions? It seems a logical question.
Well, I mean, are the politicians in Sacramento, and I mean the lawmakers, and I do mean a majority of those lawmakers, are they going to hold CalPERS responsible or accountable for the fact that we're less than 70% funded?
But isn't it done by the decision of how they invest their money? It was
that's a board decision.
Holier than thou. Yes. We're going to make stupid decisions based upon our good feelings.
Right. Well, their own investment management firm that they paid money to go out and independent of CalPERS to understand, hey, based on our investment scheme, based on the market and trajectories and where we anticipate going, our policies, all of those things wrapped together, what do you think we're going to make in terms of an annual return over the next 10 years? And the independent brokerage firm says it's going to be about 6.2%, 6.2. So what CalPERS then should do, kind of conceivably here, is they would then go, okay, if 6.2 is a solid number, independent firm, we paid them a bunch of money, that's what they came up with, it's reasonable, we need to start dropping our discount rate down to that 6.2%. In other words, we need to drop the rate that we assume we're going to make money on this asset that we're putting into the market. We need to drop it to what it's actually going to make. And when you do that, when you say instead of 7 or 7.5% is what we think we're going to make, see, I'm sure to a lot of people listening to me right now, when I say we're going to go from 7.2 to 6.2%, that's a 1% drop. Not that big a deal, right? 1%. How can 1% have such an amazingly large impact? Well, the reason why is because you have to divide the 1% is 1% of 7. So it's really 1 divided by 7, which will produce, say, 15%.
Yeah.
So it's a 15% change. It's not a 1% change, right? And so that change to our liability means that if we're not going to make 7 or 7.5%, we're only going to make 6.2, then that means the money has to come from somewhere to backfill the lack of return on your investment. Well, it comes from the taxpayers. It comes from additional contributions.
Isn't the problem the automatic increases that based upon the fictitious rate of return that they're providing these retirees? Is that where the problem lies, in that you can't keep increasing the
COLA to the retirees and things that they get? Yeah, I think that those are a part of it. Although if you're a retiree, which I know a number of them in our community, they'll say that they really anticipate and need those COLAs to stay parity with the market, that kind of thing, right? Because they don't want to lose their purchasing power into their retirement, which I get that. I would attack it
Yeah,
with
but realistically, you can't financially give people something that's not there.
Well, no doubt, but at the same time, I think that there's other issues that produce this unfunded pension liability than just the COLA that's embedded in the retirees. In other words, the lack of tobacco investment. If you're going to, so in the same board meeting, CalPERS is hearing, oh, we're only going to make 6.2%. Oh, well, that's a bummer. Over the next 10 years, dang, we're hoping to get 7.5. And then on the other hand, they're like, okay, what's the next agenda item? Stop investing in tobacco taxes, 9% on average the last 100 years. We don't want that. So let's divest away from tobacco stocks that have had a historically high yield, and because it feels good, and then you're taking away all of that money that it would have generated. And you're then saying, hey, local jurisdictions and state employees, I'm going to need you guys to backfill the fact that we're not investing in tobacco or the Keystone XL pipeline or the South Africa apartheid state, which is, again, what it originally came from in 86.
The dance away from the coal.
The coal, exactly.
And and scary part of it is whenever we allow our political views to influence our business decisions, we get these things that are conundrums that we have to deal with afterwards.
Right.
The state of California now, everybody says, oh, it's leaning this way, it's leaning that way. The decisions they're making are based upon, as Andy says, is feelings.
That's right.
You can actually decide things on your feelings, or you can look on facts.
We'll get back to whatever you were discussing before we got sidetracked.
Well, absolutely. So I'm just saying this isn't a way to scare people. It's to genuinely try to put this into perspective and to make sure that I'm properly ringing the bell. Think about the 2007 versus 2017, the change, and then so. From 101% funded status, we're super funded, to 68% in 10 years. And then think about where we are from an economic standpoint in terms of our economic growth, our GDP outlook. How are we going to sustain another recession in terms of how would this pension fund survive it? We've got on the books debt now over $20 trillion at the federal government. We've got Social Security and Medicare probably upwards of $100 trillion, in between $100 and $200 trillion. So why am I saying those things? What's the relevancy? All of this is putting a real squeeze on the government's ability to I guess, move forward, to sustain itself. And you say, well, why? We can print our own money. And that's true. And that's why we haven't gone the way of Greece yet. We're over 100% debt to GDP. Okay, that's what Greece got to. So in other words, we have more on the books debt, $20 trillion, and I didn't do my debt clock look, but I'm sure it's another 5.5 billion higher than it was last week. We have more on the books debt than we do in GDP. So in other words, if $20 trillion is our debt, which it is on the books, and I keep repeating on the books because we have a ton of debt, more than this, even off the books, because we don't record it as a federal government. We don't even indicate what that liability is, such as we do at the state and local level now through GASB 68. So our gross domestic product, GDP, is something like 18 to 19 trillion. So we have surpassed our own GDP. That is the same situation that Greece entered into back in was it 08 I think as well, or around then, and they've had such amazing difficulties in Spain, in Europe. Well, we're there too. We just print our own money, so we have a little bit better way of delaying the pain. But all of that is also to say, though, as you may be able to delay pain, and we as politicians have become real good at that, but you can't delay the inevitable. And the longer you delay, the worse it gets, and the fewer options you have when you do, in fact, finally address it.
So basically, you're saying sometimes we're going to have to tear the Band-Aid off and all at one strip instead of just a little bit at a time.
Right. That's right. And the politician who does it, or the politicians, they are going to have to take that political hit for being thoughtful and sustainable to our children and our grandchildren. So, the worst word in government, I think, from the past, is austerity. Nobody wants to talk about austerity. Nobody wants to talk about reducing the size and scope of government. What I do. That's where I do want to talk. What I don't want to talk about is raising taxes.
We're going to take a commercial break here. Plug in here for him for Blue Star Moms. Blue Star Moms are going to be in front of Walmart in Yuba City on Thursday, November 2nd from 10 to 4, selling wreaths for Wreaths Across America for $15 to be placed on veterans' graves in this area in December. So again, front of Walmart in Yuba City on Thursday, November 2nd from 10 to 4, selling wreaths for Wreaths Across America for our veterans' graves in December. So, Nate, we'll give it back to you.
Andy, you asked a question about specifically what is getting the CalPERS issue so bad and what's driving the liability so high. So from an article from the Marin Voice, which actually you provided to me, I believe a week ago's time. This is October the 2nd, 2017. And the one of the main thrusts of it is, as far as the issues, is the final salary plans that CalPERS represents. So final salary means that it's as follows. So let's take a 30-year employee. They've been working in the county or city, even the state, whatever it is, for 30 years. And all along the way, they started, let's say, as a administrative assistant or a secretary, et cetera. And they worked their way up. They became, over time, a mid-manager or maybe even a director, whatever it is. And good for them for being so diligent in their career. So they make it to the end of it. And that salary that they earned, obviously in year 30, was something enormously more than year 1, year 2, year 3, all that. And that's not only because of cost of living or what we call inflation, but it's also, of course, just through promotions and working hard and getting a better salary. Well, so what the final salary aspect of CalPERS is it says, well, yes, we've asked you to pay, for example, this percent of your salary towards the pension, and the employer covers the balance over time. So let's say 20%, just to grab a number. So for every dollar we pay you, we're going to need to contribute 20 cents down to CalPERS. Well, what happens is at the end of your 30-year service career, now that 20 cents, let's say it's the same 20%, 20 cents on each dollar, it's now on over $100,000 salary. It's not on a $20,000 salary that the person made when they first got hired 30 years ago. So the pension that they receive is based upon their rate times their highest pay. Well, in this case, it's over $100,000. So the problem here, and what the author is saying, is that your model, your funding model for this liability, it's got this huge hole in it because, yes, now the actuaries will say, well, we take that into account. We know that people are going to end with a higher salary. And I say, well, okay, but how? It's very difficult to take that into account. It makes your art become even more artful because you now are saying that I know that the reality of these numbers are a little bit off because at the end they're going to have this much higher salary. And so I need to mitigate that huge salary at the end. And so they're going to make adjustments to their model. Well, the more adjustments you make to the model, the more the model moves away from, and some oftentimes, I'd say reality or what the end conclusion generally becomes. So it would be interesting to have a pension where when you pay, that is your accrued benefit. And you don't get at the end of it to come back and say, well, now I'm going to pretend that for the first 29 years, I was actually making over $100,000 because that's what the pension's going to pay out on. See, when you're paying for your pension for the first 29 years, you're paying assuming a much lower salary. And then you get this big salary towards the end, this pension spike, some people call it, and boom, you've got a pension that just was 50% greater than it otherwise would have been, and you haven't funded it the same.
Didn't they, at one point in time, wasn't it a game to actually spike your salary prior to your leaving or retiring? And didn't they pass a law to limit that?
Yes, they did.
Situation.
They did, and it's not perfect, but I think that I want to say that might have come about from the city of Bell. I can't remember exactly, but
That was, well, those guys went to jail.
yes,
Thank
they did.
God somebody
They
went
did.
to jail.
Yeah, the one I remember, he had 3 different hats. He was paying himself full-time salary for 3 different. Anywho, so moving on in this article, a couple of more things that I really appreciated, and I'm gonna just throw out this quote from the article: "CalPERS is an economic illiterate's delight, incompetent, corrupt, and mismanaged.
Fantasy math.
Plus, it is a great excuse to raise taxes."
You don't have to. You can hope. You can tell us what you really feel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's more like fantasy math, isn't it? It's just like we're going to hope we're going to make this, but at the same time, we're going to turn our head and look the other way.
Unfortunately, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars that are invested. So it's a sad state. Here's a nice summary. Same article. I just really appreciated this quick couple of sentences. Sentence. So let me get this straight. Use aggressive investment return assumptions, and then spend all of the gains from the stock market run-up in the 90s and expect taxpayers to make these whole when the future unfunded liabilities inevitably happen. What they're talking about, or what this author is saying, is so you used aggressive investment return assumptions that were over and above what reality ended up coming to be at, and then you also increase from 1998 through about 2005 our pension rates across the state. So the state started it with CHP, and state workers, then local jurisdictions started bleeding. They started bleeding employees to the state, to CHP, so then they had to raise their pension formulas. Well, all of that has come home to roost with a 68% funded status for CalPERS as a whole. So once again, if we have an economic downturn, I don't know that CalPERS can sustain itself. I believe at that point, what will happen is there will be such a large conversation in Sacramento that change will occur one way or the other at CalPERS in a big way.
What would be a solution to that? It's just if you could wave a magic wand and start something, what would it be?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the Constitution. I'm a firm believer in the kinds of philosophies that the founders and framers held. And so I'll say free market, Andy. Free market is often the answer to so much. And I think Mike's going to jump in with some support of the free market. Seems like Mr. Economics. But specifically, if you give employers, so CalPERS, if it, through legislative change, this is back to what I believe is the only real pathway out of this, you have got to change the way that closing works. Because look, as an employer, it's the same as an individual in the free market. If you don't like something from this business, or you don't like that they're supporting this political cause that you disagree with, you take your money and you go somewhere else. You go to the competitor, right? The same, I think, idea can hold, and ethics can hold here. If we don't like what we're getting from CalPERS, we should be able to walk away from it in a reasonable fashion. But right now, there is really no reasonable way out. We're completely locked to it. So what I'm saying is some supervisor group, county supervisors from a long time ago, because a lot of times this is 80, 100 years ago, those made a decision for every future board in that county into perpetuity, because you can't undo that decision. That's wrong. In fact, we have in law, you guys know this as supervisors, that the board from 2 years ago, if you weren't on it, it cannot saddle you, this new board, with, for example, a contract that you can't get out of. You get to make the decision. Not in this case. You can't on the CalPERS.
CalPERS is one of the personal headaches that faces just about every governance in the state, and it's I can't agree with you more, but the free market thing is really going to actually. The only way I see this ending is kind of like the bubble on the housing, where it's going to be a lot of pain.
A lot of pain.
And I just can't participate in CalPERS. It's one of those things. As an elected official,
You have no choice.
no, as an elected official, Andy says you have no choice. As an elected official, I have choice. And when I became elected, I decided not to participate in CalPERS retirement because I don't believe that politicians should build a retirement. I don't believe in career politicians. Now, the only way I could speak to that with integrity is to not participate in. So I don't actually participate in CalPERS retirement. And on other places, the employees, they don't have an option like that, but elected officials do.
We do.
Yeah, we do. So I actually withdrew from CalPERS on the retirement side because it's one of those things that I can't speak against it if I'm participating in it. I'm just one of those guys. If you don't have the character to do it, you can't talk about it.
Well, that's very noble of you. I will mention in terms of the severity of it and how it's coming home. I have two different ways that I can forecast into the future what our required contributions are going to be from a Sutter County perspective down to Sacramento, down to CalPERS. So there's two ways. One, I can look at the actuarial reports from CalPERS produced by an independent actuary, and I can add up our safety and miscellaneous and the projections that they provide in there. With those projections, Sutter County is in 2020, 2021 is increasing over from today's amount. So currently we send 15 and a half, almost 16 million down to CalPERS each year.
Isn't that special?
It is. That is going to rise $4.5 million to what would be over 20 million in a mere 3 years from now. So our squeeze, and you supervisors, this is really hard because you guys have to make decisions from a budget perspective as to how, and now again, I'm speaking about Sutter County, you all are a Yuba County board, but I don't think the situation is all that much different in Yuba County. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to also see some kind of increase somewhere around these kinds. And how do we get through it? Radio host after us, he keeps talking, Lou keeps talking about service insolvency. That's this new catchphrase. It's what that means is governments are going to have so much obligation towards pension, towards retiree medical, that they're not even going to be able to provide the basic services for which they came to be.
We're seeing that, coming with the upcoming increases. I think they say 7% for the next how many years, and we're going to have to figure out where do we get that money from? Where do we cut back on? We're already razor thin on public safety, and so we're going to have to figure out some way of working with that. And what's the least painless solution, though? That's we've defined the problem. Now the question is to come up with some kind of workable solution.
Well, it actually radiates back to the everybody's life. If everybody at home has to come up with more money or cut expenses, something's got to give. Unfortunately, our kids like living indoors and eating food, so we can't cut that out. But yet now we're saddled with more debt. So what do? Do we default? Do we just pretend it's not there? Do we go into the vaporware? I hate to say it, the vapor belief of the emperor has new clothes and he's actually naked. I mean, we're into that realm where unfortunately we get to be responsible and accountable for many decisions that were made easily in softer ways earlier.
That's right.
But again, how you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Let's say, what would be the first step we could take to change direction?
Right. And it's a very, I'm going to say it again, noble cause and honorable thing to do to address it today. And who cares? I mean, I'm not saying who cares, but even so, even with our predecessors not producing solutions or getting us on the hook for things that perhaps we shouldn't have ever been on the hook for, the fact that we're having that conversation today and hopefully attacking it is very noble, and I hope that our children and grandchildren look back and say thank you. Is what I'm saying. Well,
we have research, just for your knowledge and edification. We have researched what is an option for CalPERS. We've researched some ideas, and every time we turn to the left or the right, a lot of times we have our hands handcuffed through labor negotiations. They don't want to give it up. They want to do this. So when that happens, then it just makes it a little more difficult for the results.
Okay.
But what we're seeking is results.
What would be the first step?
Okay, and thank you, Andy. I do appreciate the question. So I'm going to go right from this article because we did it in Sutter County and already, and I want to highlight it. So another way to cut or manage pension costs and lower reportable liabilities is setting aside money to make future CalPERS payments. Bartel estimated, from this article, that more than 100 local governments have set up pre-funding trust funds with several private firms. Okay, so Sutter County in 2016, through my staff report and recommendation, adopted just this thing. So we are Sutter County. We are one of the 100 local governments that is described in this article. And what is it? It's called the terminology is called pension pre-funding. What's pension pre-funding? I hate the prefix pre. I really do, but that's just what they call it. So it's setting aside money, not with CalPERS, but with some other entity, and it's really setting aside money in your own irrevocable trust. It's called a Section 115 trust, and you can. So, for example, if I've got $1 million, which is what we did last year, extra money. And you say, well, how can you have $1 million extra money? I'm saying that we didn't spend it because generally we spend every penny we get. So we didn't spend it, and instead we sent it down to this irrevocable trust. And we set it up with an agency called, it's a private company called PARS, P-A-R-S. And PARS specializes in setting up Section 115 trusts for both OPEB, other retiree medical, OPEB, as well as pension pre-funding. And so what you do there, Andy, is you send as much as you can get out of your treasury to this irrevocable pension trust each year. And the idea being is that you build this thing up. You get to determine, the board, how it's invested. Unlike at CalPERS, you have no say.
Sure.
So you get to say, hey, from these 5 investment schemes, I want to be on option 2. Great. And you can be nimble in the market. You can change your investment scheme fairly quickly. So if you start to see a crash coming, you may go towards bonds and get away from equities, that kind of thing. You have none of that at CalPERS. So right out of the gates, this money you've got now a handle on. It's your way of investing it.
You know, I'm working on getting Dan Mearswa
Awesome.
on here about, and we'll bring this up. But yeah.
Well, actually, in
Wow.
Sutter County, interestingly, I brought the recommendation forth to the board and got it approved. But I actually worked with the treasurer and made him the plan administrator because I thought that was a more appropriate place because when
Sure.
we're talking investments, the auditor really shouldn't be involved. The treasurer needs to make that call. So although I did bring it forth, I handed it off to Steve Harra, the treasurer, and he's done well with it since. Okay. So that's a really easy, low-cost way to get in. The only issue with it is, as we just talked about, the amount of money available to send over the next few years, at least, is going to be ever squeezed because of these increased contribution rates by CalPERS. Mm-hmm. But if you can get $500,000 out of your coffers for the next 5 years, bam, you've got $2.5 million plus whatever earnings it generated at the end of that. And this money, there's a twofold amazing benefit to it. One, you're setting aside money, getting it out of, for example, the union negotiations in terms of raises. That money is no longer available for raises. And you can tell the union, it's not a way to hide the ball. You're telling the union, look, we're putting this aside for your employees to have a pension. This is a good thing. This is a healthy thing. But it does take it out of the negotiations. And then that second issue is, or awesome benefit, is so let's say that we do have an economic downturn and property taxes decrease or there's some other squeeze on your resources. What you can do in an emergency situation is you tap that irrevocable trust to reimburse yourself for monies that you have to send to CalPERS. So I told you, Sutter County, we're sending about $16 million right now to CalPERS. So let's say we came up with this huge economic downturn and we had put aside $3 million in this fund. In an emergency situation, because we're paying $16 million a year to CalPERS, we can get that pretty much that entire $3 million sent back to us to offset that $16 million we sent. So in other words, it is not only a way to pre-fund pension and to set aside money, invest it how you want, but it is also kind of an emergency stash. Because you have ongoing pension costs, the money that you put in there is specifically to pay for pension costs. So when you need to tap it, it's a matter of the board's choice to tap it. So if, again, emergency, you tap it, you bring that back into your pool treasury, and you pay existing bills.
Okay.
So it's got a great advantage to being nimble, to being independent of CalPERS, and everything that can be decided at the local level is better. So the board gets to choose.
All right. Now, you put together a resolution for the board to adopt. Is that correct? Or did you?
I don't recall if it was a resolution or not. Of course, County Council would
Whatever
have
it
helped,
is,
but
can you
yes.
send the paperwork over to us?
Certainly. I'd be very happy to
Okay.
do that. Yes.
When in doubt, plagiarize.
We've been
Yes.
looking at CalPERS. I mean, the PARS.
PARS, yes.
Parts.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah, Public Agency Retirement Services is the acronym.
Okay. Well, isn't a couple of the reserve units aren't they on that type of a retirement or withdrawals, PARS? Is that rings familiar as the reserves because they didn't take out CalPERS, they took out PARS.
I don't know, Andy.
Okay.
I'm not sure
All
of that.
Well, we will do our best to look at what you guys did and see if we can address something because it's like the 800-pound gorilla on the couch. It's not going away.
Yep.
It's not there, right? It's not there.
Yeah.
You do not see the 800-pound gorilla.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
You're
Right.
listening to 1410 AM, The Patriot.
Yeah. I'm going to have him do my commercials.
Baritone. Well, at the risk of being, I don't know, perhaps frustrating or a little bit annoying, the reason I talk about this CalPERS pension thing frequently because it deserves that. If we're not going to talk about the 800-pound gorilla, I don't know what we're doing. Let me just give one kind of last example. I appreciate the supervisors putting together a top 10 strategic kind of priorities listing, but I would have appreciated it if the pension solution, the pension pre-funding, the pension issue was front and center and was, say, one of the top 3, as opposed to kind of being buried within, I think, the 5th or 6th point.
We can do that.
It's just it's
You mean you actually hope for financial responsibility and intelligence to happen in governance?
gonna keep trying, sir.
We got 5 minutes. Do what you want.
Well, I definitely wanted to say happy Halloween to everybody out there. It's coming up Tuesday and should be exciting. I also want to make sure that I always get into to thank our police, fire, emergency personnel, our men and women in uniform, how much we appreciate them. Just feel for everybody that either lost loved ones or their homes, and the amazing work that our firemen and women have been doing. And the folks that often don't get the thank you, but Andy, last weekend you made sure to do that, and I'll repeat, is all the folks that are in your general government, meaning not fire, not police, those folks that got out of their beds and they went into the emergency operations center and they spent days and days and days there working their tail off trying to support the good men and women of fire and police doing their work. Yeah. So, the administrators often don't ever get thanks. They often just get slammed, but they should be thanked too for getting out of bed and supporting our men and women in uniform.
Well, I think we owe a great debt to Bendorf's foresight in that putting people in the right place. It reminds me of Trump does the same thing. If you get a Marine Corps general to be Secretary of Defense, that makes common sense. But Mr. Bendorf is a little humble on that, but he's put the right people in the right place at the right time, and everything OES was Plan B, Plan C, Plan D. If everything went south, he had a Plan K out there somewhere, and we looked at people who were fresh out of bed. It's like you said, they jumped out of bed. They don't have makeup. They're still in their sweats.
Yep.
And they're sitting there banging away and answering phone calls and researching and making. We have a young lady who does the GIS maps.
Yes.
And she's sitting there banging away, trying to make the maps come up with the proportion that's needed to respond to people's questions. And sometimes people forget how difficult it is behind the scenes. In the old World War II D-Day, can you imagine the logistical nightmare of supplying that many troops? And they're the unsung heroes, the people that supplied the beans, bullets, and Band-Aids to support those people fighting the fire. They had troops they had firefighters that were out in the fire, left for days on end without support. And where they got the support was the local people were bringing them water, bringing them food. Yeah, you get me on talking about that stuff. I've been known to clear bars, but really, it's those unsung heroes that enabled them to be able to do what they did. So again, thanks.
One of the most exciting parts of the people who helped develop those maps is that Cal Fire was actually using the Yuba County provided maps.
Awesome.
They didn't have them, and the organization. I have to say this real briefly. The organization at Yuba County got national recognition because of because of how organized it was. If you ask FEMA, they were like, "We've never seen a county operate like this."
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you're a Yuba County resident, you know what?
Be proud.
We did good. You know, I don't get to. I'm not part of. You know, I'm lucky to be part of it, and I'm humbled and fortunate to serve. But Yuba County in the operations of emergency services is awesome.
I got to get another plug in for the Blue Star Moms. Going to be in front of Walmart, Yuba City on Thursday, November 2nd from 10 to 4, selling wreaths for the Wreaths Across America. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Wreaths Across America, and for $15 you can participate, and we're going to all be putting those on the graves in December. So, anything else? Final note? All right. We're going to probably have to go here pretty quick. What do we got? A couple of minutes left? Okay, so again, we'll talk about Walmart. It's Christmas. It's November 2nd from 10 to 4 in front of Walmart, Yuba City, Wreaths Across America. So, are we ready? Let's go. This is dedicated to those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country, the wounded in our hospitals, and to the missing POWs. Freedom isn't free. For those who fought for it, freedom has a special taste the protected will never know. This is also dedicated to the first responders who do the things we're afraid to do and protect us with their lives.